All right, time for us to check in with Tom Mulcair, a feature brought to you, of course, by the folks at Guaranteed Industries, reminding you summer is unfortunately coming to an end, although you'd never know it by the forecast we have for the next 4 or 5 days. But sooner or later, it will, and you want to be ready. So you want to give them a call, get yourself a Can-Air climate control system from Guaranteed, and get ready for winter, which eventually we'll get here. Guaranteed Industries, 514-342-3400, serving Montrealers since 1957. So, Tom, let me start off by asking you, we have new polling out today, Léger polling, that shows the news only keeps getting worse for the CAQ, but the good news, I guess, for Eric Duhem, and we're going to hear his interview with Elias a little later in the show, this is the best numbers he's had, I think, in a while, maybe ever.
Yeah, and it's an indication of the fact that Legault keeps borrowing from Duhem's ideas. Now, the one thing I hope that Legault, before he finally resigns, the one thing I hope he steals from Duhem of the Conservatives is his idea for this so-called third link in Quebec City. This is a multi-billion-dollar project, keeps getting put off. Now they're doing something completely bonkers, spending billions for a bridge from the North Shore, to the island of Orleans. This is a small bridge for an island that has a population of 9,000. So they're spending almost as much as we did on the Champlain Bridge. It's completely crazy. The way they've chosen to go about it makes no sense, and the price makes no sense. But they could have at least done one thing. They crossed the island of Orleans, which would take up about a third of the trip and save a bunch of money just by, there's already a road there. They could just have expanded it and gone out the other side. This has been Eric Duhem's proposal for a couple of years. I completely agree with Duhem on this thing. And Legault is so pig-headed simply because it's an idea that came from the Conservatives and Duhem, he won't do it. So he's planning to do his so-called third link right beside the one that they're spending billions of dollars on now, making a span completely across the St. Lawrence. Makes no sense whatsoever, but that's where we are. So good on Duhem for coming up with the ideas and letting Legault at least have some, because Legault is in absolute free fall right now. It is unbelievable how bad it's going for the CAQ.
So his numbers are down, the CAQ's numbers are down. I'm wondering what you think of this idea to start going after unions, for example. I mean, you had Jean Boulet come out today, a little late on the STM strike, but still, is this going to be the approach going forward?
They're looking for scapegoats. They're looking for enemies. They're looking for adversaries. They're looking for people they can have a fight with. So when it wasn't the doctors, it's going to be unions writ large. All weekend long, they talked about getting tough on crime, this law and order thing. The minute we had that killing at the Starbucks in Laval, we had an intervention by the head of the Crown Prosecutors Association saying, by the way, we have 50 fewer prosecutors. Overall, there were 135 fewer people working in that area for the province, and they're not being replaced. So it's completely fake. It's totally phony when they talk about law and order. Criminal gangs have taken over not just the city of Montreal, but now the North Shore and the South Shore, burning restaurants at will because they've been, of course, demanding money. If not, they'll burn the restaurants, and they do. And this has been going on under everyone's nose. But when the brave women and men in uniform, our police, catch these guys, and it's almost always guys, very often they don't even have a trial because we don't have anybody to prosecute them. It's an absolute proper scandal, but it's not like health, where that you can publish the numbers of how many people have not had their cancer operation. It's not like education where you can find out how many schools are full of mold and mildew and it's dangerous and making the kids sick. The hell, the Justice Department is something that's a little bit, it's not very concrete for most people. Well, guess what? It's very concrete when you start seeing bullets fly at a Starbucks. But again, Legault has done nothing about it, and he has failed completely in terms of public safety the same way he failed on health and education.
Tom, let me move on to Mark Carney in Washington. Yeah. Really only a second meeting. I thought for sure they'd met before, but actually officially the second meeting between himself and Donald Trump, even though a Canadian delegation has been down there on and off for quite some time. What are you expecting to come from this, if anything?
I'll start with a reference to a quote from Carney going back a few months when we started dealing with the madness of King Trump. And I remember him saying, look, no deal is better than a bad deal. So what he was trying to prepare Canadians for was the fact that he was not in a rush to get a deal with the U.S. The good news, Aaron, is that the Americans want a deal as much as we do. It's one thing for Trump to say, I've got billions of dollars flowing into the U.S. Treasury, which is true from these tariffs. But when you add a 45% tariff on Canadian softwood lumber, and you need that lumber to build houses in the States, guess what? It's not the lumber company in Canada that's paying those tariffs. Certainly not the Canadian government or Canadians. It's American consumers. who are going to be paying tens of thousands of dollars more to build a house in the United States. That causes inflation. Consumers are going to start to notice, and it's the same thing with regard to a pickup truck because the steel is being blocked at the border and so forth. Look, the Americans have an intertwined economy with us the same way ours is intertwined with theirs, but we have a much smaller economy because we're a much smaller country in terms of population. So it's been hurting us more overall, but the Americans do want a deal. I think that Howard Lutnick is a very smart cookie, and I'm getting a very good impression that Dominic LeBlanc has been doing an outstanding job, quite discreet. I mean, he gives the occasional report. Yesterday was to the Senate and things like that. He talks about it a bit, but he's been very discreet about his work so far, and I think that's an incredibly wise choice. You don't start talking about your discussions with Trump or the people around him. I do think that we're heading for a deal. I don't think that Carney would be going down there otherwise. I also think that Trump is such a scoundrel that he'll see the very fact that Carney's coming down for a deal that they've probably discussed in some detail, both sides. It wouldn't surprise me to see Trump try to use that to his advantage to try to get more at the last minute. It's the way he plays the game. Overall, I do think we're heading for something good, and it'll be very helpful for Canada. When they gave a hint earlier this week that they were willing to give some ground on what we call supply management, so eggs, poultry, and in this case dairy, is something that's sacrosanct. It's a different system in Canada, family farms, things like that, as opposed to these big, conglomerates that control everything in the States. But there was an opening from Ottawa saying we would let in a bit more American milk. Now, that goes against something that was voted on by Parliament in June on paper, but I guess they're going to try to have a workaround to explain to Canadians that the system's not being lost, but a good part of the system is going to be lost if they do it. If that's the type of thing that has to be done to get a proper deal, it'll be a loss for Canada, but long-term overall, if we get that as part of a big deal, then I think it might be worth it.
So I want to go to something else because I've heard talk about this earlier, and I completely do not understand how this plays out. We had Alberta Premier Danielle Smith yesterday stand up and float the idea of a pipeline, right, an oil pipeline going from Alberta to the West Coast. But it's a federal project that would have to be part of the federal plan, which is their new, their new plan that they rolled out. I'm trying to understand how this would work. As a province or as a provincial premier, you don't have any jurisdiction here other than to say to Ottawa, we'd like to do this. Will you include this in your big plan? Is that how this works?
Exactly. So there is this new agency that's been created by the federal government. It's being headed up by the woman who was in charge of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's the pipeline that you and I just bought to the tune of $35 billion to the West Coast, and it's flowing, and it's really carrying a lot of the bitumen from the oil sands to Asian markets, and that's a good thing because we're less landlocked and sending everything exclusively to the Gulf Coast of the States. We call it the Gulf of Mexico. I guess Trump calls it the Gulf of America, but nobody else does. We were locked in with the Americans on that, and that pipeline's proven to be great. There was another project for one called Northern Gateway, and it was higher up in British Columbia. It is a non-starter. David Eby, the Premier of BC, has already said no. That's precisely. I mean, she's praying that BC says no and that this turns into a big fight and that Carney says no. She wants to have a fight with Carney. She's trying to help Pierre Poilievre. She's trying to have the Conservatives. She gets to go. We've lived in Quebec for so long. We know how this game is played, and she's playing it exactly like a typical Quebec government. You ask for something that you know they're not going to give you in advance, and then you get to say Canada's falling apart. We can't even get what we want. She said that during her press conference. Unless we get this non-existent pipeline that not one single company is willing to build, and she wants the federal government to build it, unless she gets it, it means Canada's falling apart. She had the guts to say that at a press conference, completely fake. She's a total fraud on this, but that's the game that they're going to keep playing.
All right. I guess we'll leave it at that. Tom, I thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Aaron. All the best.
Take good care,
man.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.